Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol duly observed. My name is Chiamaka Chukwujama, and I'm here to present a paper I worked on assessing the impact of low carbon emission strategy on energy demand and oil production in Nigeria, future oil production in Nigeria. It's a work I and my professor did, that was 2020-2021 at African University of Science and Technology, Professor Iledari. He was my supervisor. Okay, thank you. So we all know that Nigeria is one of the major oil producing countries in Africa and even in the world, because we have large reserve, both oil reserve and gas reserve. And it's no news that this consuming and producing this fossil fuel especially has contributed to a lot of both health effects and environmental effect. Environmental effect, we'll talk about the oil spillage, we talk about the continuous greenhouse gas emissions, and a health effect, especially those that stay in Port Harcourt, they will experience some kind of, some of them, a lot of them has effect on their kidney because of they inhale a lot of gases in the atmosphere. And this has been a result of the fossil fuel. And we also know that this fossil fuel, we don't really have it much that can sustain us, because this fossil fuel is non-renewable energy. And Nigeria is also blessed with renewable energy, but we see that we utilize more of this non-renewable energy than the renewable energy. So now we know that we will continue to utilize this fossil fuel, but then we need more of energy sustainability, right? Yeah, and that's what we talk about, merging both our renewable energy and our non-renewable energy together to help sustain the energy demand of the continuous population. Yeah. So in our work, we talk about managing our energy, strategy to manage our energy. And for us to manage this energy, we have to look at carbon options. So in our work, we looked at our reference scenario, which is what we are now, the current scenario, where we'll be utilizing our fossil fuel and maybe our solar energy. And we also look at our low carbon scenario. We assume that in the low carbon scenario, Nigeria, we are saying her and renewable energy. Okay, in our work, we see that even in the two scenarios, we see that there will be continuous energy demand. Nigeria will continue to demand for more energy. So the energy demand will keep increasing and increasing. But how do we manage this with the resources available? Okay, so in our work, we see that in our low scenario, the cumulative energy will actually be half the reference scenario. While we also see that the cumulative greenhouse gas emitted in the low scenario will be 4.9 times lower. So if Nigeria will implement the low energy scenario, our greenhouse gas emission, which is our target, will be reduced to 4.9 times the lower than the reference scenario. Please, the next slide, please. Okay, these are the introduction we talked about. Next slide. Okay, so in our work, we actually utilize LEAP. LEAP is Long-Range Energy Alternative Planning. It's a computer modeling that helps to forecast energy demand. It also helps to forecast greenhouse gas emission, not just in a short range, but as long as. So in our work, we started from 2018, which is our base year, to 2060. So we are looking at the future. How will the energy demand in Nigeria look like in the future? And what happened to the greenhouse gas emitted? Okay, so we look at the current energy pattern in Nigeria. We looked at the Nigeria energy demand projection. And we also projected the effect of our oil production. I will also predicted the associated greenhouse gas emissions. Please, next slide. Okay, this is our base data in our 2018. We considered four sectors in our work. We considered the agriculture sector, the service sector, the residential sector, and the industry. We see that from the pie chart that the residents, they consume more energy. Yes, it's obvious because you use your LPG, you use electricity, so you consume more energy in the residential sector. So in 2018, according to the data we obtained, the total consumed energy was 5.78 billion gigajoules. And the highest being the residential sector, and the least being the agriculture. Agriculture only consume oil products. Please, next slide. Okay, this is our scenario design. We looked at the reference scenario and the low carbon scenario. The reference scenario is based on the current energy demand growth rate and our current GDP. While the low carbon scenario, we just assume that Nigeria will utilize more of our renewable energy resources. In the reference scenario, we assume that no new policy, the government's target and the policy are just the same. Like the government will not implement new carbon, low carbon emission policy. While in the low carbon scenario, we looked at that there will be demand, continuous demand of LPG, because know that LPG is still part of our way of energy sustainability. In our low carbon scenario, we also looked at 5% and 20% of hydro, solar, and wind energy demand in 2020 and in 2030, respectively. And the biofuel and the waste, 20% contribution. Next slide, please. Okay, this is our model in the LEAP computer modeling. Now, from the Nigeria LEAP model, which is our focus, we looked at the energy demand, and under the energy demand, we have the industrial sector, we have the resident, we have the service, and the agriculture. And each of the sector, we consider these products, we consider the coal, the crude oil, and everything listed there. And after the energy demand, we also look at the transformation sector. The transformation sector had to do with the supply of this energy. But in our work, we only consider the oil refinery as our transformation sector, and the fuel fuel being the crude oil. Yeah. So in considering the Okay. To analyze our greenhouse gas emission, we consider the energy demand and the transformation sector. Why do we consider this? Because as you use energy, you emit gas, right? And as you also produce, you also emit gas. So that's why we focus our greenhouse gas emission in our energy demand and our transformation sector. Please, next slide. From our result, we see that the energy demand will continue to increase, both if you are considering the reference scenario and the low carbon scenario. But you see that in the reference scenario, the energy demand is higher. We have an average growth rate of 5% in the reference scenario. And by 2060, we're expected to have our energy demand to be approximately 25 billion BOE, that's barrel oil equivalent. And in our low carbon scenario, we see that there will be growth, but it will not be as high as the reference scenario. The growth rate of approximately 4%. Yeah, and by 2060, the oil demand will be 10.91 billion BOE. All right. Next slide, please. When we consider our oil production, we see in our low carbon scenario, definitely is going to affect our oil production. Why? Because we are also looking at using our renewable energy resources, right? So as we're using our renewable energy resources, it's also affecting the production of our oil. You know, you produce as the demand increase. So the demand of oil will reduce. And because the demand will reduce, definitely the supply will also reduce. So we see that by 2060, it will look as if we are not even producing oil at all, even though we still have a lot of reserve, both oil and gas reserve. So in our oil production, reference scenario, we amount to 268.38 million BOE. While in the low carbon scenario, we see that the oil production will reduce to 1/10. So whatever we are producing now, in 2060, our oil production will reduce to 1/10 of the reference scenario. It could be more. So this is a forecast. It could be more, but we are looking at, if we want to look at only renewable energy resource, is really going to affect our oil production. So the oil that we have, what happens to them? So we have to look at the way of managing our energy, so that we'll be using both our renewable energy and our non-renewable energy, because these are God gifts to us. So we cannot just leave one dormant and be utilizing the other one more. Okay, next slide, please. When we consider our gas emitted at the point of emission, obviously, a reference scenario is going to have high emission. So we are looking at, by 2060, the ratio of reference scenario to low carbon will be 5:1. Whatever we are emitting now, if we continue to utilize only our renewable energy resources, our greenhouse gas emitted will be increasing. And it will be 5 times the low carbon. All right, next slide. So what are we talking about in our research? We're talking about that, okay, Nigeria will continue to utilize her renewable energy. What about the non-renewable energy? If we are looking at energy transition, what happened to our oil? So we have to look at a way of managing both our renewable energy and our non-renewable energy. So under the low carbon scenario, we see that if we utilize 3.27 billion BOE renewable energy in 2016, the oil production will be reduced. The demand of oil production will be reduced to 0.18 billion BOE, out of which 17% will be utilized by only 4 sectors, and the remaining 83 will be wasted. So if we look at our oil produced under the low carbon scenario, out of the 80 million BOE produced, 25 will be lost, and the remaining 75 will be exported to which country? To countries, maybe country that will buy it in a very low price. So our revenue will be lost, our oil will be lost. So it's better we look at a way of looking at both our renewable energy resources and our non-renewable energy resources, instead of just transiting to renewable energy resources and leaving our fossil fuel dormant and without utilizing them. Thank you.